help me welcome Laura Rasmussen Foster. Ms. Foster is a program director for the Adult Education Studies at the RTI International, where she manages research projects and provides technical assistance to states and programs in many areas related to the workforce issues. Please help me welcome Laura Rasmussen Foster.
Thank you. Thank you all so much for having me today. There's already some very important messages that have been shared, and I'm here as the first speaker, and these are tough acts to follow already. So I hope that we can continue the conversation that Darius has started, that Michael has started, and that will be carried on throughout the day. First of all, I'd like to say that I'm so happy to be here. I am a native of the Bay Area. I grew up in San Jose, spent a lot of time in Palo Alto, and I've found myself on the East Coast for the last 10 plus years. So it's really nice to come home, and I thank you for giving me that chance. I'm here today to talk to you about the Employability Skills Framework, one of the many frameworks that Michael referenced that are available for you to help kind of support the work that you're doing. So I'm going to start by giving you a little bit of context about what employability skills are, why they matter. And then we'll spend some time looking at the framework and hopefully help make connections to the work that you're doing in your after-school programs. I'll also spend a little time sharing some of the tools and resources that are available to help support your work. I normally give a training like this in 3 hours, so it's condensed. I will not be talking for 3 hours. But that just means maybe a lot of information we have to gloss over quickly, and I'm happy to answer any questions afterwards, so please let me know. All right, so there are a lot of terms that are being used to describe the skills that youth need to be successful at school, in college, at work, and in life. And I'm sure a lot of these terms are going to resonate with you. Most of them have been mentioned already. We have soft skills, non-cognitive skills, college and career readiness, social emotional learning, 21st century skills, and employability skills. But the question for me is, kind of, what do these terms mean? Are we using different terms to talk about the same set of skills? Or are we using different terms to talk about somewhat similar skills, but they're different, and we have to think about all the different ways to integrate all these different types of skills into our programming? And that's exactly the question that my company, RTI, set out to answer when we created the Employability Skills Framework for the US Department of Education. And that was, what do these terms represent? How do they relate? Can we begin to identify the connections and the similarities and provide a common language? Pull everything together into a common framework to guide the work that we're doing in the education and training world. Luckily, the answer to that was yes, which is why I'm here today. So we'll spend some time looking at that. Let's start with a general definition so that we're all on the same page. By employability skills, we mean the general skills and knowledge that are necessary for success at all levels and in all jobs. So that means the skills that somebody needs to be successful as an engineer, as well as an auto mechanic. We're not talking about that job-specific knowledge that they need, but those general skills that make somebody successful no matter where they are in their careers. Why does this matter? There's a lot of research out there that shows employers value employability skills as the most important skills in the labor market, and they also say that they're the skills that are most often lacking from our job applicants. So employers kind of insist that the job-specific knowledge can often be taught on the job, but it is essential that incoming employees have these general skills that enable them to interact with their coworkers and to adapt to different workplaces. Just this summer, there was a report released by Harvard that looked at the importance of social skills to the labor market. And the basic premise was that computers and robots may begin to automate some of our job functions, but they can never replicate the human interactions that are required to complete the work. And so because of that, this report found that employers are willing to pay more for employees to have good social skills. So just last January, RTI, my company, interviewed a couple of employers to understand why employability skills matter. And we actually produced a radio show for a local public radio station in North Carolina. And what we heard from these employers was that employability skills matter. They matter very much when making hiring and personnel decisions. We had Emma Battle, who is the CEO and founder of a small business in North Carolina called 360i, talk to us And she shared a story with us just about kind of how she values and uses these skills. And so the story was that she had hired a young college student from North Carolina to fulfill a sales role. And she told him when he was being hired that this role would eventually be phased out. So he was coming on for a temporary basis. Sure enough, 3 months later, the small business had generated enough new business that they no longer needed the specific sales role. And so Emma approached her employee about transitioning out. And he said that he'd like to stay. He'd like to move into an advertising role of which he had no prior experience, but he felt that it was something he could do and that he could apply what he had learned already in sales to advertising. And Emma said in making this decision, she agreed. It didn't matter as much to her that he didn't have the direct experience in advertising. What mattered was that the position he had been in required a lot of cold calls. He was selling services to clients. So she was pretty confident in his communication abilities, his ability to work well with others, and was willing to give him a chance just based on his track record and these kind of general skills that would help him adapt. So I thought that was a pretty powerful story about kind of why these skills matter. We also talked to a larger company. We talked to IBM about why employability skills matter and what it looks like at IBM. And our contact there, Grace Sue, who is the manager of education initiatives, explained and kind of described this shift. So from programmers who used to sit in a back room on their computers, not interacting with others, to those who are now more market-facing. And they have to be able to interact with clients. They have to be comfortable in different work environments, and that there really is this need for employability skills. And in fact, Grace described the ideal employee at IBM as somebody who has as T-shaped, somebody who has the deep technical knowledge in an area and the broad employability skills. And she said now more than ever, IBM is expecting their employees to have these skills. So we know these skills matter. We know they're very important. There's a huge research base. So if you're interested in any of that to help make the case, happy to share that with you afterwards. But what I wanted to do now was turn to the employability skills framework. I wanted to start with a little bit of a quiz. You're not going to get graded. But I just ask each of you to think to yourself. I'm not going to ask you to share a secret, and I'm not going to share one of mine. But to think, kind of based on your experience in after-school programming and some of the conversation we've already had this morning, what do you think are the 3 most important employability skills? You can keep them in your head. You can write them down. We'll come back to your list. You won't be graded, but I just think it's helpful to kind of start this conversation. So here's the framework. You can find this on the Employability Skills Framework website, which I will provide the web address soon. But I wanted to start by kind of focusing in here on the core, 3 core categories. You have applied knowledge, effective relationships, and workplace skills. And we'll go through each of these in more detail. So let's start with the first category, effective relationships. And by that, we mean the interpersonal skills and the personal qualities that we need to be able to interact with our coworkers, with clients, with supervisors. And by interpersonal skills, you'll see here a list of things that include teamwork, customer service, leadership, conflict resolution, and respect for individual differences. Personal qualities, so things like responsibility, flexibility, the ability to work independently, to demonstrate a willingness to learn, to have integrity, to show professionalism, to take initiative, have a positive attitude, and then to take responsibility for your own professional growth. So there's a lot in here, as you're seeing. The second category, workplace skills, and by that we mean kind of the analytical and organizational ability that we need in order to perform work tasks. And so here there are categories of skills like resource management and being able to manage time, money, and personnel, information use, so being able to locate, synthesize, and communicate information, the communication skills, being able to communicate verbally, in writing, to listen actively, to understand and observe carefully. Systems thinking, so the ability to use, monitor, improve systems. And then finally, technology, understanding the appropriate use and being able to apply technology in the workplace. And for our third category, we have applied knowledge. And applied knowledge is the ability to apply what you're learning in the classroom to a different context, and here the workplace, and the ability to think creatively and critically about your work. So under applied academic skills, we have the ability to use reading skills, use math, use science at the workplace, so kind of out of the context of how you're learning it in the classroom, and then to think critically, creatively, make decisions, and to reason in the workplace. So I imagine there are many thoughts going through your mind right now, and one may be, gosh, that was a lot of information. That was too much information. And so I do encourage you to visit the Employability Skills Framework. But maybe the second thought is one that I had while I was developing the framework, and that was, well, duh. That was actually, that thought came out of my boss's mouth. Of course these skills are important. We know that. So what? And so the point is, these skills are not new. These are things that you all have been doing and people have been talking about and identifying for decades. And so we did hear some sighs of relief when we started presenting this to educators, and this recognition that I'm already doing this. I may not be intentionally calling them employability skills. I may not be covering every skill in the framework, but I'm doing this. And that is one of the messages I want to share. This is not a new separate framework that you need to incorporate into your after-school programming. Instead, we really want to help you find connections to the work you're doing, to think about how you can better integrate and, again, be intentional. Help students understand this was an exercise in teamwork, and teamwork is an important employability skill because you're going to be working with teams at the workplace. So we did hear some sighs of relief. We heard from educators that they were very much aware of these skills, but they had never really been pulled together in one place before, that there was, wasn't a common language for talking about employability skills, and that they hadn't been labeled as an important part of college and career readiness yet. But then we also heard some pleas for help. How can we integrate this into our classroom instruction, into our after-school programming? And hopefully I have some ideas, but I'm also looking forward to hearing kind of throughout today how you're already doing this. And the other message that I want to share is it is not the responsibility of one teacher, one grade level, one after-school program to address all of these skills. The hope is that as a student makes his or her journey through education and through work, these skills are being reinforced in different ways and in different contexts, and that we all recognize the roles that we can play from our different perspectives in helping students gain awareness of their own employability. So I've already mentioned that employability skills are an important part of college and career readiness. This graphic here shows it as one of the 3 key components of college and career readiness, along with academic and technical skills. But what I also like to stress is that these are also important life skills. I mean, just think about how we all got here today. I certainly had to look up the time, figure out what time the event started. I had to look up the address, and then I had to figure out how to get here. So already I've been using kind of my time management skills, I had to locate information, and then I had to communicate with the person at the hotel and figure out how was I going to get here. So these are skills that no matter where we are in our careers that we use and we rely on constantly in our professional and our personal interactions. And I meant to ask when we came back to this just quickly to follow up on our quiz, were your skills in the framework? Were you surprised? You don't really have to answer. But what I find is that when I do this exercise, a lot of people tend to focus in on the interpersonal skills, kind of what we refer to as the soft skills, and are surprised that there's such a range of skills and kind of seeing some of the applied academics and those other types of skills. So you all pass. So hopefully the next question is, well, how do I begin to integrate these skills into my after-school programming? And hopefully the Employability Skills Framework website can help. There are a lot of tools and resources on it that you can explore, and I really encourage you to do so. You can see the web address at the top. There's a section on assessment, kind of what makes employability skills different to assess than other types of skills. There are audience-specific pages and tips for educators, for employers, for policymakers. And then there's a tool called the Lesson Planning Checklist. And I'm going to take us kind of through an abridged exercise with that lesson planning checklist now to hopefully show and kind of help you think about how you're already addressing these skills in your programs. So the Lesson Planning Checklist is a tool that helps educators reflect on the extent to which they're addressing the skills in the framework. So it can be used at the beginning, kind of in your planning process as you're thinking about activities and lessons for your programs, and it lets you kind of just map those skills to the framework. You can also use it at the end as documentation, kind of, here's what we did today, and here's all the employability skills that were addressed. So I found a lesson from the after-school training toolkit, and wanted to share with you today. It's called What Makes Our Community Special. It's for students in grades 3 to 12, and students are asked to work in teams, to use technology to research information about their communities, and then to create a final product and give oral presentations about their findings. So there's a lot more detail on the lesson itself, but I think the synopsis gives us enough to start to make connections to the framework. And I think you could probably argue that that lesson, just that paragraph, hits on almost all of the skills in the framework, but let me highlight for you some of the obvious connections to me. One is the use of technology. Students are conducting online research, they're preparing electronic products. There's certainly information use, the fact that they're locating information about their communities, synthesizing it, analyzing it, and putting it all together in a final product. There's the communication skills. The final project is an oral presentation. Interpersonal skills, they're working together in teams and having to figure out how to work with one another. And then there's certainly the applied academics. There is kind of inherent to all of this is the ability to read and to write and to apply those skills that they've learned in the classroom. So hopefully this was just a quick exercise to help you see how you can kind of begin to think through the activities that you're doing and how they relate to the framework. If you're actually using the lesson planning checklist on the website, you could then kind of live on the site go through and start checking off and keeping notes on your activities and about the lesson and using it as documentation. So you can begin to see, if there are certain areas of the framework you're covering more than others, and kind of addressing some of those gaps as you go along. So one more time, the web address. And so as I leave you today with a list of some resources that might be helpful in my contact information, I also want to just encourage you to explore the framework, to think about how you can use it in your after-school programming, and then kind of challenge you to help us think about what's the next phase of this work. We know these skills are valued by employers. We know that educators are aware of employability skills and beginning to integrate them into their programming. So then how do we help our youth? How do we make them aware of the importance of these skills? How do we help them learn to communicate their own employability and career readiness to employers and to others? So thank you very much for your time and look forward to continuing this conversation today.